And we are live with our 213th episode of Absolute AppSec. I'm Ken Johnson at CK Tricky on Twitter, joined by my co-host Seth Law at Seth Law on Twitter. Seth, say hi.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. We are excited to be here today. We're excited to have Brian Joe from Impart Security here. We'll get into his background and story and everything here in a few minutes. As far as announcements go, our course for DEF CON is filling up. So if you are interested in practical secure code review, now is the time to sign up. There's only a couple seats left and it's a couple weeks out. There are going to be some more opportunities to sign up or trainings this year, including DEF CON trainings in Seattle, late October, early November. And we are looking at a couple other open sessions that we would like to perform. So if you have interest in any of those, please sign up. But we would love to see you in DEF CON. It's a great place to actually get the training. It was really great last year, and we're excited to give it again this year with some updates. Outside of that, I did want to thank our sponsor, Redpoint Security, for sponsoring this episode. Redpoint specializes in code security for coders, bolstered by years of experience testing web and mobile applications, conducting secure code reviews against all types of applications. It also offers trainings to help ground your teams in better security practices across the development lifecycle. So check them out at redpointsecurity.com for more information and put your company on a path to better security. Yeah, great. I think that's everything, Ken. Is there anything that I'm missing as far as visits or just regular announcements? Sometimes I drop things off my list.
I would probably add, just as a reiterate, Redpoint and Dry Run are both co-sponsoring a happy hour at DEF CON on August 10th. So, or DEF CON, Black Hat, whatever. Anyways, if you'd like to attend, DM either one of us on either, our Slack or Twitter, whatever works for you, or send us an email to info at AppSec.com. I was thinking about your email address, Seth. That's why I said that. Anyways, info at AppSec.com is the correct email address. In any case, that's all I wanted to add is that we've got a nice little happy hour with food and drinks if you want to show up.
Yep. I knew I was forgetting something, it has a tendency to happen. So cool. Well, with that, we do want to introduce Brian Joe from Impart Security. And Brian, we met actually on at the last happy hour, correct?
That's right. That's right. At RSA.
Yeah, at RSA. And we had a really good discussion about his startup and Impart Security. Hence the reason that we had the thought to bring you on the podcast and also have that same discussion. So to get into it though, right? Maybe we start with your background, Brian. You're helping run Impart now, but how did you get there, right? What was your pathway into the security space? Where did you start?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And before I start, I just want to say thanks for having me on. It's really exciting to be here. I was also going to suggest that instead of introducing your Twitter handles, you might want to introduce your X handles now.
Oh, yeah, that's true. At this point, it's so drilled into our brain that I don't know if we're ever going to be able to switch.
Yeah,
we're going to do GitHub handles instead, Ken. That's what we'll go to.
Did you guys see the troll on Twitter where they posted, I forget who it was, they posted something like, after 2.5 weeks at the company, I created that design, that logo, and I was let go. And then like a Nobel Prize or I don't know, somebody or they won some massive, I forget who it was. They won some journalist who won some massive awards, started retweeting and taking it seriously. I don't know if you guys saw that. Kerfuffle on Twitter is pretty funny.
Well, what isn't the latest that the name X is actually trademarked and up the wazoo by every other tech company under the sun between Microsoft and even Facebook or Meta actually owns X in the context of social media. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay,
Well.
so find CK Tricky on x.com, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So how did I get into security? My background's actually pretty different, I think, from most folks in security. I had zero plans to be doing security, much less application security. When I started my career, I was actually a network engineer. I started my career at Verizon and was kind of backed into security. My primary job was building networks for enterprises, so connecting their branch offices, like a cell phone store, to a data center. So I spent a lot of time designing effectively private networks for folks. And those, at the time, those networks were physically separated networks, so dedicated for everybody. But over time, what we saw is just the shift from, it just became really expensive to build everybody their own physical network because you have to dig trenches and run fiber and all of this stuff. And so what eventually happened is everyone just started using the internet for things to transport data to one another. And effectively the rise of like virtual networks and VPNs and that kind of thing sort of became my focus. And that just sort of led me to like work a little bit higher up the stack from the physical layer to more of like if you think of the OSI model, more of like the networking layer and the VPN layer. And then that exposure, just I worked a lot with financial services, with media companies. You just imagine the folks who have the most expensive networks and are paying the most. They want to move a lot of data, or they have really highly valuable data. And that was sort of my first exposure to security. And then Verizon acquired a CDN company called Edgecast Networks, which was more operating purely in the application layer. So we would do like video streaming services. We would do like advertising. We would make websites faster. And so that was really where I actually started to focus a bit more on application security, looking at technologies like web application firewall, bot management, DDoS protection. And that is where I essentially just cut my teeth, just learning all about request response, networking, application security, more of the runtime protection side. And at the time, I remember thinking to myself, man, security, I actually didn't really like it that much because I just felt like it was such a bad experience for everybody.
Yeah.
Like getting started, especially, in that world of like web application firewall and DDoS, just the experience of getting started was really painful. We would have to help customers get onboarded. We had this huge team of professional services folks, just like getting people set up. And then after they were set up, we would actually have to operate things on a daily basis. It involved a lot of things like tuning rules and updating signatures. And that was a really bad experience because it's just like this constant cycle of manual work. And then even from a business standpoint, I always kind of felt like, well, how are you going to ever turn this into a huge business? Because there's so many people just doing things for folks that like the ability to scale just didn't seem really there. So that was actually my first introduction to application security, where we needed to have these types of security services for folks because they wanted to know that their data was secure. But at the same time, I just felt like we were under, not we in like at Verizon, but just in general, the industry was sort of providing a subpar user experience. So that was my introduction to security and AppSec. Yeah. And then I actually learned about signal sciences a few years into that. Uh-huh. And signal sciences was so exciting to me because it just felt like it turned me from looking at application security as just like something that we had to do to get people to like use our other services into something that was, really, really interesting. Because we actually, at Signal Sciences, I saw how, and I joined the Signal Sciences team to lead the product management team. And what I learned and saw from all of the customers and the prospects that we worked with was just, we learned how to solve those problems and deliver a good experience. So things like getting started, we were able to get people started in just a couple minutes without having to have this huge onboarding process. we were able to get customers up and running and just working on an ongoing basis and operating without having to constantly go back to the well of professional services and sort of tuning and that whole cycle. And from a business standpoint, it was just so exciting to me to see how much we could grow with such a small team. Signal Sciences, I think at its peak was maybe 150 people. And we were just, going toe to toe with all of these huge companies, and it was really, really exciting. So that was my introduction to application security, really kind of actually starting out with a bit of a bad taste, but then starting to believe and actually become really excited about essentially the value of delivering a good experience to security professionals.
Yeah.
My co-founder, James. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, but my co-founder, James, is that, you guys know Signal Sciences. And he said that the one thing, just to your point there, the one thing that really was successful for them was the ease of installation and getting up and running. And I know you were mentioning that's like a huge, and honestly, any viewer watching will have their own stories of like the pain points of trying to get a security tool running. But yeah, no, he talked about that was a major success for Signal Science, was just like the ability to get it running pretty quickly, smoothly, without too much friction.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the lessons that I saw coming from a telecom networking background. If you really just unpeel like how those types of companies make their money, it's primarily like networking. Like just imagine your Verizon wireless bill, right? Like you're paying basically for your monthly service. And if you pay attention, they'll try to upsell you like security services for your personal phone or your home or something like that. And maybe that's like 5-10% of what your monthly bill is. And so that's kind of what happens is those types of companies they look at security as a nice way to make a little extra money, but they don't really look at it like it's something that's super critical or super important or super strategic. And so the strategy ends up being like, let's optimize for efficiency. Like let's not like overinvest in building high quality security products or experiences. Let's just check some boxes and see if we can get people to pay for it. And this is a bit of a generalization. I was very happy at Verizon and Edgecast, but like I think just in general, when the bulk of your revenue and money comes from something that's not security and you're trying to bolt security on top of that, that's what leads to sort of subpar user experiences. And so when I think the reason that Signal Sciences was really successful is when we looked at some of the competitors, a lot of the competitors are basically captive to other businesses. Like there's the whole kind of content delivery network, CDN industry, primarily making money through moving bits around, right? There's people selling like gateways, right? Or appliances. And essentially that most of the money is coming from like either like the physical appliance itself, or maybe just like the routing and load balancing kind of stuff. So it just felt like security was primarily like an afterthought in many of those things, and also forced customers to choose. Like if you want the security service, you need to buy our CDN, or you need to buy our API gateway, or you need to buy our cell phone service, in that example. So it just was really refreshing to kind of give customers choice and just to recognize, hey, not everybody wants to use Verizon Wireless or AT&T or T-Mobile or, name your technology of choice just to get security. Sometimes they just have what they have and they want security to protect what they have. So,
yep.
It kind of reminds me of F5, where it was primarily a load balancer at the time, but like it started creating modules, and one of them was like a security one, and people complained infinitely about it. They hated it. There was like real issues with it in the beginning. Now, obviously, F5 still anyway.
No, it's an interesting use case, right? Like I kind of go back, Brian, to your early experience with the like Edgecast and Verizon, and we often, as kind of developers or AppSec side of things, we have a tendency to kind of ignore the lower layers of the OSI model, even though from a performance and from even a security perspective, they're they're ultra critical to the experience that users have with security in general, right? Like AppSec, is a small silo of the overall picture. So we can't take that out of account, right? But that's where things like Signal Sciences, to your point, make for a better experience. And then I also think about like Leaf when he was Leaf Dressler, who's been on a couple of times with us, and I think Leaf and both Jerry Gamlin, right? Like their whole thing with security vendors and security SaaS providers in general is like, give me an option to actually sign up quickly and try things out, right? This long cycle of I have to go through a proposal process or whatever just to get like a demo is just not tenable for most startups, right? Or most businesses in general. So that's where that's where Signal Sciences and even most startups nowadays seem to be headed. But you still run into the odd one where it's like, oh, you have to sign an NDA and you have to do X, Y, and Z first, and you have to talk to a salesperson before we can do anything with you, right?
Yeah.
But whatever.
Not fun if you can't give the main punchline that I get from them every time is if you can't like use a credit card and go through a flow and get access like you would with any of these other, and I mean, man, I've had to like experiment with a bunch of different services lately for like SaaS offerings, and all of them have the same flow, right? Like it's you put in a credit card, you choose your tier, you get going. That has never been the case. Well, I don't want to say never. I shouldn't say that. That hasn't been the case in any of the security products I've used. That's what I'll say.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
Isn't that? Would you say that's because security is sort of by nature? Because a lot of products, when you look at them, they're like usage based. Like those types of products are usage based, right? Like the more you use it, the more like value you get, and the more essentially like you're willing to pay for it. Like security is a funny thing where, like, is it a good thing if you have to use a security tool constantly? Like it might be, but it might also not be. Right? If it's something that requires like constant care and feeding, that kind of means like, is this really, providing me with the protection that I'm hoping to get? So it's kind of a funny thing because we wrestle with, similar to, I think like yourself, Ken, just kind of like how do you let people access the product and get it in their hands as quickly as possible? And like yourself, we've kind of opted more towards like, let's let people like get their hands on it, touch and feel it, and just experience it for themselves. But it's also one of those things where it's like, as a defensive tool, like ideally it's kind of a set and forget experience, right? So how do you kind of like give people what they want, which is like a set and forget experience, but at the same time, make sure that they're actually like seeing and touching everything and like getting all of value that they can. It's a funny thing.
But it kind of goes back to the consumer or whoever it is that's actually purchasing those products, right? Like the reason that Verizon and all of the, cell phone providers or network providers bolt security on is because that's what people want. They want to pay an extra $5 a month and know that they've got their checkbox that they're secure, right?
Yeah.
And that it's not necessarily I don't want to be as secure as possible. It's I want to be compliant and I want to offload the risk and the effort of being secure to someone else, right? So I'm already signed up with Verizon. I'm going to choose their products and implement them, or I'm using AWS. So I'm going to put, I'm going to turn on the WAF there, and I meet my regulations. And then if there's a problem, I can point at Amazon or I can point at Verizon and say, hey, well, it's not my fault, right? Like I was doing what I was told to do, that the vendor told me I'd be secure if I did X, Y, and Z. Even though that's not really the case, it's this weird understanding or misunderstanding that people have about what security actually is, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And it's compliance versus security to, I don't even know how to say that name, right? I know he's
Yeah.
in our Slack though too, right? I can't even remember, but yeah. But yeah, security by compliance is not necessarily security, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
But
yeah.
it's a big driver for us, right? Like, I mean, that's what gets their products in the door a lot of times. And
Yeah.
that maybe that's next, right? Like that's probably where we should go, Brian, is okay, like this brought you to like through Signal Sciences,
Yeah.
you came up with a network background, you saw application security, you saw something that you liked. So what was it what was the impetus for Impart security and the API security stuff that you're doing?
Yeah. So it was a bit funny. So as you all probably know, Signal Sciences got acquired by Fastly, which is a CDN company.
Mhm.
So for me personally, it was interesting because I had left a CDN company to go to a next gen WAF, and then kind of like rediscovered the experience of like AppSec, and then was acquired by a CDN company.
Back to the
So
CDN world.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
but Edgecast and Fastly were very different companies, but it just at a macro level, it was kind of funny. I remember sitting through some of the onboarding training for new hires, and that training is designed for people with no CDN experience. So they're explaining concepts like this is a data center or a point of presence, and here's what And I just remember thinking like, oh, I know all of this stuff. Like it's very similar to the last CDN I worked at. So that was kind of a funny moment.
I felt right at
Yeah.
home.
Yeah, the complete circle would have been if like Verizon or AT&T, some big telecom had acquired Fastly, then I would have like made a total circle.
Yeah.
But kind of a semicircle, I guess, is what happened. But yeah, so after the acquisition, so APIs are obviously part of the web, and they have been for a long time. And API security has been, around, I think, a lot longer than people realize. I think in the past few years, it's been getting a lot more momentum and buzz simply because the number of APIs has really grown. But APIs have been around for 20 years. And so when we were at Signal Sciences, we would constantly hear about like APIs, API security. And at the time, we just felt like that's an exciting opportunity, but we were so focused on building the best next gen WAF that we could that it's just an opportunity we never really took seriously, and really made the efforts to. But it was always an area that was really interesting to myself and my co-founders. And then I think the other thing that we noticed, so that sort of we know API security was on the radar. There was getting a lot of buzz. We were kind of wrapping up our integration of Signal Sciences into Fastly, and just a few things. There were just a few technology changes that I think were concurrently happening at the time that were even different from when Signal Sciences was started. And I think that the two big ones that really stood out was just the maturation of like containerization and Kubernetes, right? And sort of like every big cloud provider was essentially building their own managed Kubernetes service. And all of that know-how was really being abstracted, kind of like physical networking, so that people don't really have to worry about it anymore. And it also made it really easy to like apply new services into like the edge of the containers or the edge of the clusters. In a similar way, like I think maybe 10 years ago, like the best place to insert a new service is probably the edge of the network, like a CDN location, right? You just pop something in next to where the closest web server is. But with Kubernetes, we just felt like, oh, there's this new kind of like in cloud edge that's emerging, and that's actually like so easy to use with all of the tooling that's being developed with things like Helm charts, right, and things like that. So that was sort of one sort of architectural change that we saw that was just like, hey, we think this is going to cause essentially the way that APIs are produced and consumed and delivered to really change. And then the other was just the maturation of like what's going on in CI/CD. So like I think infrastructure as code has always been, I mean, it's not always been a thing, but it's kind of like been a thing for a little bit of time. But what we noticed is like everything was becoming as code. We saw it at Signal Sciences, like security policies as code. People like would be including their rule sets in Terraform, right? And kind of treating them with just like any other piece of code with change control and diffs and pull requests and that kind of thing. Product as code. So we just saw all sorts of stuff moving into the pipeline, and we thought, oh, well, that's interesting, because now there's this whole set of context available really easily about what's going on in a business, right? You can basically see everything a developer is doing, everything the ops team is running, right? Sometimes all the policies a security team is defining. You can see all of that in CI/CD, and that's just context that I think historically has been really challenging to pull out, right? And it was built on a lot of manual process. So we just felt like, okay, well, with these two changes in technology, and as well as like the overall lessons that we learned at Signal Sciences, which is if you provide a really good experience around new technologies, right, and that can actually be a winning strategy. So we just saw a great opportunity to really tackle API security, because we just felt that we could take all of that context that we had around like what was going on in the pipeline, as well as combining that with some of the like newer technologies, making like security layers and things that we were really good at, like networking and enforcement, like much more easy to deploy in different places, and create essentially new company around that. So myself, my co-founders, Mark Harrison and Jonathan DiVincenzo, we were all at Signal Sciences, and we all left and started Impart Security. And that was about a year and a half ago. It's been quite a ride so far. We're really excited at what we've built so far and the traction we've seen with some of our early customers. And right now we're in building mode, and it's been one of the most fun things I've ever done.
Well, and actually I have a question on that too, like mainly for everyone to sort of, have some, you mentioned context, to have some context around, what does a head of product sort of do? Like, what is the responsibilities of that role?
Yeah.
And yeah, more about that specifically before we go a little bit farther.
Yeah, I should get a bit more into my background. So my background, I started my career as a network engineer, as I mentioned, and then I eventually transitioned into a product management function. So I did kind of the engineer, going to business school, turning into a product manager path, which is, I think, pretty typical. I've actually met another person named Brian Joe who did the exact same thing and has like kind of a similar job. So
that's not confusing.
Yeah. But so that's my background. And product management, for those who don't know, in general, is the primary job of that is to define a roadmap of like, where's the product going? So effectively, you're setting a vision of what your product will be, and you're working with your engineering teams on the one hand to build towards that vision, and you're working with the sales team on the other hand, or the marketing, or essentially customer-facing teams, to sort of gather all of the signal that you're getting from what customers are doing, and trying to come up with the optimal outcome for yourself and for your customers. So that's a traditional role of product managers. As a head of product at Impart, that is very similar to what I do. So I work very closely with our CTO, Mark Harrison, and we've, all three, I mean, it's a small company. So JD, Mark, and we all work really closely on defining what is that vision that we want to build towards. And we have a pretty clear idea that I've alluded to, which is this idea of putting together all of this context, and really rich context, and building an enforcement layer around it that will provide really high quality security. And so we essentially define that vision and like build towards it. More recently, we don't have a sales team. We don't have actually. I take that back. We hired one salesperson recently, but up until then, it's been primarily myself talking to customers, JD talking to customers. So we're just trying to gather as much information as possible and context, and have conversations with CISOs, directors of security, InfoSec professionals, just really understand what are they struggling with API security, what do they like about what they're using right now and existing solutions, what do they not like, and really just trying to gather as much information there that kind of inform that vision. So as a head of product at a startup, that's effectively what I'm doing now, just trying to shepherd our company and the things that we're building towards things that customers
It's the
want.
most critical bit too. It's like you go into this thing thinking, you have an idea of what people need, and for sure you do, because obviously you wouldn't start a company, but how to get it, how to deliver it, what things they care about, where to put your engineering efforts. Those are like much bigger questions, because it's like, you've got a limited, like you said, small company, limited amount of resources. You need to maximize where you put your efforts in all things. It doesn't matter just engineering. It matters like a lot of things, like what's the design look like? How's your customer relations, like all these things, right? And then so then you just, like I said, you go into this with this idea, and then you have to refine that idea based off of what people tell you, or not, and just don't sell anything. But you could probably go about it a better way in that case.
It's funny, like the journey has been really interesting, right? So this is my second startup. But even at Signal Sciences, I had joined a little, I was employee 106. So it wasn't like early like I am at Impart. And for most of my career, building product has been like a very iterative process, where you usually have something you're starting with, and then you get to like, okay, and then you have an idea. It's like, okay, I'm going to get to this idea, and you get to that idea gradually. It's like maybe a quarter goes by, you're like 25% of the way to your idea. Then another quarter goes by, you're 50%, right? And maybe there's some variation in the time, but generally you kind of expect this gradual, like, okay, I'm almost there, I'm getting there, etc. I think the experience at Impart has been like 0 to 1. Like you sometimes hear that idea of like 0 to 1 for early stage companies, but the 0 to 1 is like happened so fast for us that I wasn't really ready. Like I was expecting kind of a similar thing where it would be, okay, we are just getting started. We're not going to have, anything. Then we're going to have 25% of something. Then we're going to have 50, right? But it just kind of went from 0% to like 100%. And it was just like, it took me and all of my co-founders by surprise at just how like quickly that happened. And it really required us to like kind of take a look in the mirror and be like, oh, actually we have like a complete product that's really good. And it's not like we ever expected it to not be good, but it just was a lot better than we thought it would be, faster than we thought it would be. And that was really exciting.
Yeah. Well, that's a good problem to have.
Oh, yeah, it is a good problem to have. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do know what you mean about quick iterations. Like, because as you were saying quarter after quarter, I was like, man, if I said that to my investors, I think they would not be happy. Because like you said, I mean, in the matter of like, I don't know, 4 months, we've gone off and we started with an idea, and then like totally skyrocketed off into all these different things, and it becomes like very, 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 and basically, a little bit over a quarter, it's completely tuned in based off of people's feedback and what they really need and all that. And it doesn't look like what we've thought it was going to look like, right? And that's why I say it's kind of funny, because you have so much that you have to take into account feedback wise. And that's also, by the way, this is something I have like, genuinely a curiosity in. It's really difficult to determine which feedback to take in and appreciate and potentially act on, and then others that you just have to kind of throw away. Some instances it's easy, where maybe like, all right, you need this very like engineering cycle or intensive thing, and it doesn't really like feed into our overall vision. And some cases are easy, but some cases are more maybe nuanced. And I'm curious how you navigate and think about those situations when you come across them.
Yeah, no, it's kind of a classic product management problem. And it's interesting. I think because you don't want to throw the baby away with the bathwater, right? Because usually within a really esoteric feature request from a customer that they'll probably be the only ones to use is some nugget of value that actually everybody is going to use and everyone's going to benefit from. But sometimes that can get really lost right? When in some of the noise. So we try to do two things. The first is we really try to get crisp on what problem are we solving. What I found personally is, like, depending on who you're talking to, like sometimes customers have really strong opinions about what they want, right? And they'll say, you should build this thing for me. And they won't really tell you why or like what problem they're solving with it. They'll just say like, oh, if you just have this thing, then it'll make my day. And so you feel a lot of pressure as a founder to build the thing that they've asked for. But it really helps to stop and kind of like make sure you as a, builder really understand what problem is being solved, and really understand that like holistically before just like diving into like building the thing. Cause sometimes it's easy to do it, if you're kind of like a geek like me, you just like, it's easy to just get things done rather than to like stop and think. But I think that's actually been a really valuable tool for us because it helps us kind of like generalize what features come in into something that's like more of a problems, solution type of view. The other thing that we try to do is like aim small and miss small, and we'll do a lot of experiments, right? So sometimes the customer will have like this really big idea and we'll just try to say, okay, like let's try to, what's the smallest possible version of that idea that we could build that might not do everything you're expecting, but like works in a really small niche, and essentially try to test that to see if, they actually use it the way they think they will, or things like that. So, I mean, there's no like silver bullet to that, but those are the things that I've tried. And sometimes they work.
Yeah. I mean, it's a classic development. Like you said, it's a classic development problem, right? Like how do you take customer feedback and push that into a product when it may or may not actually benefit the product, or you just don't have the cycles to actually handle it, right? Like it's a staffing problem on top and a money problem on top of a functional problem, right? So trying to combine that all together can become a difficult thing. And I mean, we see the same thing from a security perspective as well. Like, okay, how do we implement this with the limited budget, with the limited funds? It's just a classic system development problem. So, so that funnel is interesting to me as well, right? Like, how it is that you're making those decisions. Can you talk a little bit more about like the small, the small projects that you're implementing, and how you go about like prioritizing those? Is it based on just like you're hearing this from multiple customers, larger customers? Like, who has the most impact there?
Yeah. I think this is actually where, like, I'm glad I spent most of my career in product management, because like, but just over the years, I've developed all of these like, tools and techniques to help kind of like.
I think that's why we're interested, because we have none of this, right? Like
taking notes.
So, yeah, exactly.
Genuinely,
Well, let me just start with empathizing for the like, what engineers and CTOs and builders feel, who maybe don't have that kind of product experience, is like, your biggest customer who's paying you the most money, ask you for this thing. Like, you feel a huge pressure to give them what they want, even if it's something that you will never help anybody else. And then on the other hand, usually it's like the small customers, like a few small customers who aren't paying you very much. That'll ask for something that's like different, right? And so if you kind of do the math of like, if you do like a really simplistic thing of just like which is bringing in more revenue, which is what a lot of like, I think people new to this kind of start to do, then you invariably end up like becoming really dependent on your largest customers, and you're almost like a bespoke development shop for them, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it might not align with the type of business you're trying to build. So typically, like the equation that I try to use is just like, what's the business value divided by like the level of effort, right? Okay. And then there's different ways to do estimations and stuff, but there's techniques. Some people use like t-shirt sizes. You might have heard of that. Like, is this
Yep.
extra large or extra large, right? For the level of effort. And then business value is kind of more subjective, right? You can kind of use like different like scoring systems and so forth. But as effectively, the thing you want to try, what that type of equation optimizes for is like speed, right? Just you end up prioritizing things that you can get done quickly that deliver the most value at the time.
Yep.
You imagine kind of like, I've always seen this chart of like a ladder moving up really fast versus like a staircase with lots of tiny steps versus like a really, really long like flat area and then a big jump. So that's how I've tended to do it. But it's also hard at the early stage too, because you're not always in a position where you have thousands of customers giving you conflicting advice. Sometimes you haven't met those customers yet, and so it becomes a little bit more like, you might not be able to use those types of techniques.
I mean,
Well,
it makes
go ahead.
No, it makes me wonder how we like ever developed software back in like the waterfall days as opposed to agile, like the idea of failing quickly and right, like really knowing, because I think back to it becomes more impressive when you think back to the old IBM days in the 60s and 70s that they were actually able to get anything out that was that was useful to people, right? Because it would be a year-long project, couple years, and then they'd turn around and give it to people and everybody was happy. I'm like, what? No one's happy if we do that nowadays, right?
And then they would never use it, and then they'd have to upgrade to the
exactly right. Yeah. So sorry, Ken, what were you gonna say?
Oh, no. Just about the whole like long empty space and then a jump. I like since you said it, you had mentioned it's like difficult for early stage startups, more so because, folks don't really necessarily have a bunch of design partners or people they can solicit feedback from. But also one thing too is like sometimes, especially really early stage, there's a lot of R&D that goes on. And that can create that and that's really a frustrating balance to make, is like, because you go with like no commits for a week or two or whatever, at least not pushing to production or whatever, because it's like this R&D. Meanwhile, there maybe are other little chunks, tasks somebody else is handling, whatever. But overall, it kind of, yes, I experienced that. I don't love it. And it's really hard in the early stages for also this additional reason. But one question I had too was, from with your career and from a product perspective, what are the unique challenges that AppSec has presented to you? One that I'll just throw out an example: different tech stacks present wildly different issues, like as an example. And so for me, that's one challenge. What are the challenges you face, that are specific to the AppSec world?
Yeah, I think that tech stack one is it's a bit of a callback to giving like CTOs and engineers choice about like what tech to use and decoupling that from security. I think that's a huge pain point. I think one of the things that is the like most salient pain point around AppSec that the customers we work with is just the kind of like tech stacks. There's different levels of like, people have different choices. Some people maybe use the newest stuff like Kubernetes. Other people are still using like Windows like 32 or like 95. I think it's similar with security maturity, right? Where like we have some customers that we work with who have a really small security team, or maybe no security team, right? But they're really advanced on all of the technology stuff and they care about security. They're kind of like the ideal company to adopt like secure coding practices, because everybody wants to do the right thing, but then they don't have like much knowledge about like what does good look like, right? And I think that there's just this, I think this bent in application security where good is often defined as like, buy this thing I'm selling you.
Yeah.
It's not defined as like, oh, this is kind of like a framework or a model that you should be using. This is how you can kind of like coming alongside, engineers and who are just getting started, and like helping them understand like, how am I doing right now? Am I doing good? Am I behind my peers, or am I ahead of them? Right. I don't have any like really, really clear guidance. So I think there's customers like that. And then there's on the other side, we have some customers who are just like on the complete other side. Like they're totally dialed in. They have a huge security team, and actually they kind of behave more like the experts. Like they already know what they need and what they want and where their problems are, and how they have like a very strong point of view on how to improve that. So I think building like solutions that kind of keep both of those folks happy is a challenge. And it also is kind of like the problem you mentioned with like prioritizing large companies over small companies, right? Because like,
Yeah.
I think if you look at like the 99% of like most companies, like they probably would say like, we're not security experts. We just want to like do the best that we can, right? But I think most of the companies out there kind of target that 1%, like with the big budgets and the big teams, right? So as a result, like there's not a lot of things like recommendations or guidance or advice like inside products and tools that tell people like, oh, this is how you're doing, this is how you can help, like share this report with with your board or your boss, right? And or with the auditor. Like those types of things I think are just like the experience things that are missing. And I think it's just due to the actually very probably related to kind of the problem that we've just been describing around like optimizing feature requests and things like that.
Some focus. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man,
Yeah.
that's so on point with people running different types of shops and not knowing. Actually, Seth, like we the last week, and I, because of travel, I couldn't engage too much in a bunch of other stuff going on with the conversation in Slack. I saw you did, but there was a lot of talk around like, hey, AppSec doesn't really standardize, what skill sets you should have, or I think it started off with maybe something about certificates, and then it just kind of bled off from there. It sounded like into like just a general lack of standardization. I think it's true for like how you're securing your software. It's not necessarily equal in all places, or not even so much that is like how far behind are we, or how far ahead are we? Are we doing things within the right scope of how you're supposed to be doing things? And there just is a huge lack of standardization. And when you said that, it just sort of like feeds into that continuing theme. Even though we have OWASP, it's very much it's volunteers, right? It's like and it's a smattering of different projects and different directions based off what people think is important at that time, to talk about. And even still, it's like, again, it's free info people are putting out.
It feels like maybe
mileage may vary.
Yeah.
To the point you were making, Seth, like this is where like basically compliance frameworks and regulations are a bit of the forcing function that kind of like, it's like the de facto standard, but it's also not very well defined, right? Like PCI is a good example where like, what's the standard? It's like, do you have a secure code or do you have a WAF? Like, like it's pretty broad. Like most people, and like, I have a WAF, but it's like turned off. Like, does that count? It does, right? So
I bought it. Yeah, actually, James had told me that, I don't know if hopefully I'm allowed to say this, that in the early days, they were finding that customers, when Signal Science was trying to do a bake off, it was kind of weird because he kept going in there and they're like, no, we have a WAF. And they're like, like, how is it implemented? Like, oh, it's not. No, we bought it. It was totally, it put us into compliance. Like, okay, but no, it's doing nothing.
PCI.
It's just sitting there. He's like, well, this is going to be easy.
It's just routing traffic.
Yeah. So hopefully I was okay to say that.
I honestly, I can't tell you the number of times I go into like AWS and you look at like the WAF rules that are set up in CloudFront or whatever it is. And it's basically just like, they might have like one country rule turned on, right? And that's it, right? They're not doing anything else, but it's so they can, PCI, check the box, or whichever reg came in. That's
no, the same is true in API security too. It's just
I'm sure, yeah,
not as formal like PCI checkbox. Like, yeah, like we've had a number of folks come to us and just say like, oh, okay, yeah, we have API security. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like, what's it doing for you? Like, is it like, what is it running in production? Are you blocking anything? Are you stopping anything? Oh, like, no. We're too scared. We just basically have it sending us alerts.
Yeah.
So it's just like, oh, okay. Well,
hey, if they're actually sending the alert somewhere, I'm like shocked. I'm going to be honest. Most of the time they're in the WAF dashboard or, CloudWatch or whatever, right? But they don't actually go anywhere, right? It's
yeah.
And if they actually follow up on those alerts, that's another layer of bonus.
No, like,
you know what'd be funny? Like, I see a lot of stats about like there's X number of APIs in the world right now, right? And every year it goes up. It would be funny if there was like, or same thing with CVEs and vulnerabilities. It would be funny to get that metric for alerts, like number of security alerts.
Alerts, yes.
How to watch? It's just like triple digits year over year.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Right?
No,
Like that's my question, right? Wait, we need Evan back on. We can talk more about like consuming that into a
I feel like you are what you measure, right?
Yeah.
I have some thoughts on how to handle that, but we'll talk again in a month. Talk again in a month when I can show everyone.
It reminds me of that, like the AI that's prompted to like, I forget what the prompt is, but like it just ends up manufacturing typewriters and like overrunning the world with typewriters because like someone told it to like, I don't know, create a lot of words or something.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Yes, that's definitely the case. Cool. Well, so along those lines, like from an API security perspective, right? We've talked a little bit about Impart, like what you've come up with, what you're doing there. I did see your blog post on like the OWASP API top 10. I wanted to go into that a little bit, like since that's fairly new, right? Like the recent list from 2023. Like, what are your feelings on having a top 10 specifically for APIs? And then, like, what do you think about the latest iteration?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. When the list first came out, I like in 2019, I was still at Signal Sciences, and I didn't actually take it that seriously in terms of, oh, these are API specific vulnerabilities. I looked at it more like, oh, these are essentially things we can solve with a WAF, right? That maybe just have like some slight twist on it. Like there's an example of like injection attacks, right? Which is the problem that a WAF was designed to solve. So I looked at it and thought, well, we can, like, why is that a specific thing for APIs? That's an attack that is relevant for anything, right?
Yeah.
But I think what's happened is API security has really matured since then, right? In the last 4 years, there's been a lot of new companies, right? A lot of different approaches. I think like the terms of like, there just seems to be more of a general understanding like of what is API security. And I think that's reflected in the new 2023 lists. And the idea is, I think all of the new list actually just seems a bit more aligned to like the conversations that I have when I talk to like CISOs.
Okay.
Right? Like generally like 2 years ago, the conversation like, well, API security, it's like API discovery, which is the act of like finding all your APIs, and we're not sure what else. That's what like there was no like it wasn't, I wasn't hearing like from customers, you need to do X, Y, and Z. These are the things I'm looking for in an API security solution. I think at this point now in 2023, what we're hearing is like, okay, API security is kind of like two sides. It's either like what's going on in runtime, right? Or what's going on in shift left SLDC testing. And I think the new list is, you can kind of like look down and it's really easy to kind of determine which vulnerability you can address best with each type of technique.
Yeah.
So I think it's good. I think it's good for the industry to just kind of share that overall like knowledge with everyone. And I think it's good. It's like a good rallying cry for the industry to get like at least a common definition, so that at least for CISO, I can't imagine like the job of a CISO is hard enough. And then when you have like hundreds of vendors telling you about the problems that you have, right, that aren't really standardized and they're kind of like duplicated or overloaded and mean different things. That's really challenging. But I think having a sort of standardized, oh, there's an OWASP API top 10, it just was updated, it's very relevant. Like we cover all of those things, right? Or we cover like, or someone else covers like 1 through 5, someone else covers 6 through 10, right? It just makes it a little bit easier for someone to make a decision. So I think that's all a good thing.
Yeah. From an awareness perspective, like that is the one thing from an OWASP, or like when we reference the OWASP top 10, that I'm happy that there is kind of that base level discussion that we have now. I know initially when the OWASP, like the API top 10 came out, I think I had a similar reaction to it that you did, right? I'm like, really? Right? It's basically just a repeat of the OWASP, the web application risk top 10, with maybe a little bit of a different classification. But the updated list definitely does feel more focused on, okay, this is a specific API problem with the function, the data, like different ways that you can protect against it, as opposed to, hey, just, do what you were doing on the web, but just do it against an API, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's good to have your perspective there. Since, well, yeah, you're dealing with it on a daily basis, right? Like I definitely see APIs, and we started to use it more from a consulting perspective as far as like reference material, where 2019, I don't think we ever really used that list, right? It was just like, just go to the normal OWASP top 10 and we'll call it good. but now there are more specifics there, which is great for us, right? It's great for the industry to have that discussion. So,
yeah, totally.
Cool. I slipped that in there. We do want to be cognizant of your time, Brian. I know we've been talking for an hour. I'm pretty sure we could talk for another hour or two on all these different topics, but we want to make sure that we're being respectful, because we appreciate you coming on, giving us your background, letting us pick your brain on startup life and product management. And but before we wrap things up, is there anything else that you would like to highlight, from an API security perspective? Anything else that's on your mind?
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me on. The only thing I'll say is, for anyone who's going to be at Black Hat or DEF CON this year, we've got some interesting stuff planned. We have, yeah. So we I don't want to like give away all of the secrets right now, but like we've got some really exciting stuff. So definitely you can ping me on LinkedIn, Brian Joe, or you can go to our website and essentially register interest for meeting us at Black Hat. We've got some, like I said, some pretty interesting stuff planned. The other thing I'll just say is feel free to, for those who are interested in API security, check us out. Check out our website, www.impart.security. You can find us on LinkedIn as well, Impart Security Inc. The social actually is the best way to keep track of all of our comings and goings. Yeah. And yeah, it's been a pleasure, guys. I really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure talking about it. Yeah, thanks. We always appreciate technical and having the full on discussion like we've had today. Yeah, so it sounds like people can see you at DEF CON and Black Hat. You'll be out there.
Yeah, I think I might drop by your happy hour also.
You should. So come to the happy hour. Yep, we'll have there's actually going to be quite a few guests there, right? I know Jerry will be there. There's a couple others. So it'll be a good time.
August 10th, 5 p.m. Las Vegas time. Because apparently when I did it in Slack, I said Eastern time. Because now I'm officially old, Seth.
Yeah.
Now
Can you imagine Las Vegas? Someone in Las Vegas running on Eastern time.
Eastern time.
Oh, they're showing up. I got an invite. I got an invite yesterday for something at like 9:30 in the morning because it was on East. It was sent for Eastern time, and I think that they mean clearly not 9:30 in the morning in Vegas on a Friday. But anyways, time zones.
Time zones.
They're hard.
Time zones
They
are
remain
hard.
difficult.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Sweet. All right. Well, appreciate the conversation today. Thanks again to Redpoint and DryRun for sponsoring the Absolute AppSec Happy Hour in Vegas. Thanks to Redpoint for sponsoring this episode. And thanks to Impart Security and Brian for coming on.
My
we'll
pleasure.
catch everybody online. Please join Slack if you have not. And we'll keep the conversation going there. So, all right. Anything else, Brian, before we call it? Nope. All
Thanks
right.
for having me on. This was
Thank
great.
you,
Thanks,
Brian.
everybody.
Do it again soon.
Yep. Thank you.